As much as I love retro games, and I find myself gravitating towards them more so than new releases nowadays, I am also passionate about modern games too. In fact, some of my favourite games of all time came out within the last 10 years. So, although I am a retro game enthusiast, I'm not exclusively a retro gamer. Because of this, I found myself very interested in the concept of the video game demake. Essentially, this takes a modern game, deconstructs it, and then recreates it as if it was made for an older console. So join me in today's video as we take a look at 3 of the very best video game demakes. Now, a lot of the time when you're looking for these demakes, you'll come across screenshots or even videos of games like this Uncharted demake or this one of God of War Ragnarok. This is all very impressive and fun to see what some of these games would have looked like if they're released on previous generation hardware, but what I'm even more blown away by is when these demakes aren't just videos or still images basically existing as a proof of concept, but an actual playable game in their own right. The first of these games we're taking a look at today is Super Smash Land, a demake of Super Smash Bros. Created by Dan Fornes that aims to take the Smash we all know and love and cram it onto the original Game Boy. Now, although this is replicating the style of the Game Boy, it isn't actually playable on the Game Boy itself and is actually available on PC. Of course, if you're interested in playing this game or any of the others in this video for yourself, links will be in the description below. Right off the bat, I love the title for this one, taking the convention of handheld Mario games having the word land in the title and then implementing that into Super Smash Bros. Gives it a feeling of authenticity, and that feeling persists even into the game itself. Several modes from the main series can also be found here, including the single-player focused arcade mode, an unlockable endless mode, and even features multiplayer in the form of the Versus mode. I spent most of my time in the arcade mode, playing as each of the 4 starting characters including Mario, Kirby, Link and Pikachu, and I even unlocked Vaporeon too. Which is awesome because, as most of you probably know, Vaporeon has never been in an official Super Smash Bros. Game before. So as you would expect, the moveset for this character is completely original. I like how the characters here have been carefully chosen to reflect the ones featured on the Game Boy too. For example, there's no Fox here because there wasn't any Star Fox representation on the Game Boy, but Mario, Kirby, Link and Pikachu all had games on the system, so it makes sense to feature them here. Probably the biggest difference outside of the graphics going from this to an actual game in the series is that the controls have been very much simplified. With you only having access to a D-pad and 2 buttons, there's no grabbing or dodging, and each of the characters' movesets have been dramatically altered to work with a single attack button. Instead of having one button be specials and another be standard attacks, here they're mixed together with you performing a variety of attacks based on what direction you press as you press the button. Meanwhile, the other face button is reserved for jumping, which I almost feel like was a bit of a waste because up on the D-pad could have been jump, and then the 2 face buttons could have been reserved for specials and standard attacks, to make it feel more similar to the proper Smash games. Either way though, this is a really fun experience, and there's actually quite a lot to discover here, with secret characters and some unlockable stages, which all have some pretty cool gimmicks. Of course, it doesn't have the same level of replayability that the actual games have, but that's almost the point. I mean, this is a downgraded version of Super Smash Bros. For the Game Boy, and that actually ends up making it feel really authentic. It's almost a shame that this isn't actually playable on the original hardware, because this goes to show that a Game Boy Super Smash Bros. Experience could have worked. But no, instead we had to wait until the 3DS to get our fix of handheld Smash. The second game we're taking a look at is potentially one of the most ambitious demake projects ever to be created. It takes the original Halo created for the Xbox and demakes it not for the N64, not even for the NES, but for the Atari 2600. Absolutely ridiculous. The developer of Halo 2600 is Ed Fries, a former Microsoft employee who was actually very heavily involved with the company's acquisition of Bungie, the developers of the actual Halo game. At first, this project wasn't supposed to be quite as ambitious as it actually is, and started with just trying to create the main character of Halo, the Master Chief, on Atari hardware. However, the project grew and grew until it turned into a full game released in 2010, and very impressively, this one is actually playable on Atari 2600 hardware. It even had a limited run of physical cartridges released for the console. Because this was created for a much older system, Halo 2600 feels much more arcade-like than something like Super Smash Land. It's a very short game, but it's also quite difficult to compensate for that, which makes it easy to play over and over again, because you know that with one more attempt, you might make it that little bit further. The objective here is to traverse each of these areas and find a keycard which opens a barrier to the next level. While searching for the keycards though, it's in your best interest to be as thorough as possible, because you might come across upgrades for your weapon which allow you to shoot faster, or shield items which allow you to take a hit without losing a precious life. And when I say precious, I really mean it, because you've got 2 lives to use up, and once they're gone, it's game over and you start the whole thing all over again. Despite this being an Atari game, the character sprites are actually pretty detailed, even being crudely animated like we see here with the Master Chief's walk cycle, and we get a really good variety of enemies, from grunts to elites, and later on we even get cloaked elites and these security towers too. Not only is this game incredibly charming, but it's actually legitimately quite good. If this had actually released back when the Atari 2600 was new, this probably would have been one of the greatest games on the system. Potentially the biggest flaw with it is that it doesn't feature any kind of scoring system, which would have incentivized replaying it even more. But to be honest, I think that this game was pushing the hardware to its very limit as it is. It's very technically impressive, surprisingly fun, and it's just insane to see Halo, what was considered a groundbreaking game at the time, recreated in this way. The final game of today's video is one of the more recent demake projects to gain massive amounts of popularity, and this one is particularly special to me personally because not only is it a demake of one of my favourite games ever made, but it's also for my favourite console ever made. I mean, how could you go wrong? This is Bloodborne PSX, released in 2022 and developed by Lilith Walther as a demake of the PS4 title Bloodborne as if it was a PS1 game. Like Super Smash Land, this isn't playable on original hardware and is once again available on PC. But that doesn't take away at all from how incredible this is. While you could make a good argument that Super Smash Land and Halo 2600 are fun little novelties that are good for about an hour or so, but probably lose a bit of the staying power after that, Bloodborne PSX is an entirely different beast. This is basically a recreation of the entire first area of Bloodborne, featuring all of the NPCs, key locations, and even bosses, only this time with added pixelization. There's almost so many impressive things here that I don't even know where to begin, so I guess it makes sense to start at the beginning. As soon as the game opens up, it displays the original PS1 boot-up screen along with some fake developer logos, and this just makes me feel really nostalgic and adds to the authenticity of the game as well. The options menu features an incredible amount of graphical customization, allowing you to apply loads of different filters which mimic an old CRT TV, or make the game look slightly smoother to reflect what PS1 games look like if they're emulated. After that, there's a character customization screen where you can adjust the scale of different parts of your body, your voice, and your starting stats, and then we even get a full-on recreation of the first cutscene too. I mean, the scope of this game is just ridiculous already, and we've not even started playing it. When the game begins is where you notice just how special this actually is. The controls have been massively changed from the PS4 version to reflect how it might have felt with a PS1 controller. The L2 and R2 buttons rotate the camera, there's no analog movement, instead relying on the D-pad. The inventory screen looks like it was taken from the Tomb Raider games, and the whole thing just oozes with that classic PS1 feel. All of this is great, but then after you start playing for a while, you realise that despite the game featuring all of the classic areas from the proper game, it's also been heavily modified to include brand new areas and expanded sections in familiar locations, and this breathes new life into a game which I'm already very familiar with, and elevates the entire game into something that almost goes beyond a straight up demake. In case it's not obvious by now, I absolutely love Bloodborne PSX, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to finally try it out. If you're a fan of the original game or just interested in demakes in general and you haven't yet given this a go, you owe it to yourself to play it. It's phenomenal and probably one of the absolute greatest examples of a video game demake. And with that, we've wrapped up the video. Let me know if you've played any of these games for yourself and what you thought about them, and also let me know if there's any other demakes out there that you think we should be taking a look at. After all, there's probably loads of incredible ones out there that have just slipped under my radar for some reason. For now though, this has been Rob from Retro Dodo, and I'll see you in the next one.